The face of Northumberland we see today was fashioned by a series of ice ages which began nearly 2 million years ago and ended only 10,000 years ago. For most of that time, these hills were part of a vast frozen wilderness, covered in a layer of ice in places almost a mile deep, stretching unbroken right away to the North Pole. Huge glaciers moved slowly but relentlessly downhill, gouging, grinding, and scraping clean the underlying rock. But even an ice age had to end sometime. By about 10,000 years ago, temperatures had risen, the ice had retreated, and colour and life had returned to Northumberland.
Thousands of years of freezing and thawing shattered these rocks to form whole hillsides of scree, or glidders as it's known locally.
The first plants to arrive were lichens, clinging to the bare rock. Remarkable little plants. Lichens are probably the oldest living things in Britain. Some of them grow so slowly they could well have begun their life 10,000 years ago when the last glacier melted. As the climate warmed, vegetation spread steadily northwards. Grasses, plants and shrubs were followed by the trees, rowan, birch, willow, pine, and then hazel and alder. Once established, they soon became widespread.
After the ice melted, the first men came to Northumberland about 8,000 years ago. When they got here to Routing Lane, they must have thought they'd discovered a prehistoric paradise. They were wanderers who lived by hunting and gathering fruits. They had no permanent homes. Instead, they used caves like these for shelter.
Apart from a few flints, these early Northumbrians left little evidence of their ever having been here. But in the course of the next 2,500 years, a new lifestyle evolved. Woodlands and forests were cleared, hunters became farmers, animals were domesticated, and tools of metal were added to those of flint and stone.
Neolithic and Bronze Age people did settle here, and they left ample proof of their existence. They carved these strange cup and ring marks on these sandstone outcrops 3,000 to 5,000 years ago.
The meaning of these markings remains a puzzle, especially when you consider that almost identical markings from the same period have been discovered in places as far apart as Portugal, Africa, and Australia.
Some of the most unusual and complex examples of rock art to be found anywhere in the world are here at Dodd Law, just a few miles south of Routing Lane.
Only a few yards away from these in distance, but constructed 2,000 years later, is a typical Iron Age hill fort. Within the ramparts, they built their circular huts with low stone walls and sloping thatched roofs. There would be a fireplace in the centre, and the doorway was usually in the east. Almost every hilltop in Northumberland is crowned by one of these forts. Here they could defend themselves from other tribes and the animals they hunted: wild boar, wolf and bear. All of these beasts have long since died out, but the wild cattle who roamed the forests of prehistoric Britain with them have miraculously survived here at Chillingham, overlooking the Millfield Plain. The herd roams freely in their 365 acres of the great park at Chillingham, owned by the Sir James Knott Charitable Trust and managed by the Chillingham Wild Cattle Association. The patron of the association is the Dowager Countess of Tankerville, and her son, the Honourable Ian Bennett, is president. His family line goes back almost 800 years. The wild cattle attract many visitors between April and October, and I was one of them.
So in a sense, Ian, the Tankervilles have always cared for the wild cattle of Chillingham.
Yes, I suppose ever since they first came here in 1260. And in fact, when my father inherited this estate in 1931, he was rather horrified to discover that the cattle were his own personal property. This is called the Allerswood, out in Northumberland for Alder, and it's the last remaining piece of what was once called the Great Vinwood of Chillingham, yes. Which is a rather nice example of what the whole of this area would have been covered with in those early days. And we like to preserve it, as you can see, with a piece of that ancient landscape.
So these cattle have been here a year or two then, Ian, have they?
Oh, quite indeed. They've been here at Chillingham for at least 700 years, and they probably originated from the continent where after the end of the Ice Age, when they would have walked across on the land bridge that then existed. And they originally roamed wild in what was called the Caledonian Forest, which stretched from here right up to the Forth Clyde estuary. They, of course, now are the sole remaining members of their species in the whole world.
Absolutely unique, aren't they?
It fascinates scientists that they live in complete security, whereas with other species, once they get down below 500, everybody gets worried, and that's an interesting story in itself.
There's always a king bull there, isn't there?
Yes. Now, he is boss of the herd, and he is appointed not by human beings, which causes all the fuss in domestic animals, but he's appointed by the herd. Yeah. And after all, they know much better how to manage their affairs than we do, and we hope that we're humble enough to recognize that. He is father of all the calves that are born within the herd. And he would, the natural instincts of the bulls make it certain that it's only the strongest and fittest bull that occupies that position.
How assured is the future of the cattle now then, Ian?
Well, the first thing that the James Knott Trust did on purchasing the park was to give us a 999-year lease of the park, which means that the herd is safe here for roughly the next 1,000 years. And I suppose that's about as far ahead as one can reasonably plan these days.
The cattle in the park are part of our Northumbrian heritage, but they are not Chillingham's only attraction. Visitors from all over the world and in all seasons of the year come here to savour the serenity of the lovely old church of St. Peter. It's full of surprises. You'll find only one other example of these box pews surviving in the whole of Northumberland. In the Grey family chapel is by far the best medieval tomb in the north of England. In 1419, this Sir Ralph Grey's uncle, Sir John Grey, was created Count of Tankerville by King Henry V. Sir John had shown great heroism in capturing the French town of Tankerville. Sir Ralph and his Lady Elizabeth have lain here for 5.5 centuries. Visitors can hardly believe that such a tiny country church should house such an exquisite masterpiece. Their castle reflects the power and wealth the Greys and Tankervilles enjoyed. Its original design of 4 strong corner towers, linked by a curtain wall, soaring above and around the courtyard, has remained unchanged in more than 650 years. After the Second World War, the castle stood empty and fallen into decay until it was bought in 1982 by Sir Humphrey Wakefield, a relative of the Grey family by marriage. Sir Humphrey is restoring the castle to its former glory, and it is now open to the public. This was, in medieval times, the old tilt yard where the knights jousted. Now it's a beautifully manicured, formal Italian garden. Once it would have resounded to the thunder of hooves, breaking lances and clanging armour. Now only the soothing ripple of the central fountain and the constant birdsong disturbs its quiet charm. Above Chillingham rises the lofty outline of Ross Castle. It's not a castle really, but it's the best viewpoint in Northumberland. To the west lies the town of Wooler, capital of Glendale and known as the gateway to the Cheviots. The Cheviots pile up above and beyond Wooler and roll away in waves to the Scottish border. At the end of the last ice age, meltwater from the Cheviots filled up the flat expanse of the Millfield Plain to form a vast lake several miles long. Eventually, the sheer weight of water forced its way out northwards through the debris left by the glaciers to join the River Tweed. Nowadays, the River Till steadily quickens its pace along this same route through the Millfield Plain. I followed the river downstream to pay a visit to Heatherslaw Mill, where I was met by John Bradley, a teacher turned miller.
What surprised me was that the power of that little stream could turn that massive wheel.
Well, it turns all the machinery in the mill. Everything that moves in this part of the mill is driven by the water wheel. So we've got 3 pairs of stones, we've got a barley wheel, and we've got all the ancillary machinery, the grain cleaners and the dust cleaners, all that kind of thing is driven directly from the water wheel.
How long's there been a mill here at Heatherslaw then, John?
Well, the first mill was built about 1340, but the present one dates from about 1826, and it was a big mill on this side of the river.
Has it been working all that time?
It was working up till 1950, and then it was finished as a rented property. It closed up and fell derelict until 1972.
And who restored it then?
Well, this was Lord Joyce's activities in trying to keep buildings which he owned in good condition, and so he formed a trust which looks after the mill now and ensures that it will be continued for as long as possible.
Is this the only one left in Northumberland?
It's the only one that works that's left in Northumberland. All the rest of them are either derelict or are in a state where they've been turned into housing and this kind of thing.
Mind looking at you, John, and understand how millers get the nickname Dusty.
Well, it's a bit breezy today and it's blowing it down the chutes more than usually, but...
It is a dusty job.
It's a very dusty job, yes, indeed, yes. And wash me off and make scones at the end of the day, you know.
Just over the river from the watermill is the terminus of the Heatherslaw Light Railway. Except for the engine, all parts and equipment used on this 15-inch gauge railway platform, open office, rails, carriages and guards van were made here at the workshops on this site. From Heatherslow, the tiny steam engine, the Lady Augusta, carries me sedately by the riverbank through the 2 miles of lovely border countryside to the village of Eton. There's been a crossing over the River Till at Eton for centuries. Just a few yards from the river, the solid old castle of the Manners family still stands sentry over the village as it has done for more than 600 years. Roofs of thatch, spotless whitewashed walls, beautifully kept gardens, and the Black Bull, the only thatched pub in Northumberland, make Eton a village of rare charm and character. The people of the place are rare characters too. They always seem to have time for a bit crack.
But 90-year-old there, my God.
I know.
We've got one in the village, old chap. He's 90.
Oh,
yeah. And he's only got one eye. He's only one eye.
I've heard they have to
And
shoot them here.
And he plays kites. He owns kite pitch in front of the hall there. The old chap, 90-year-old.
Where's your kite pitch?
Front of the hall. See the wooden lids on the village green there?
Aye.
Well, those are clay ends in below there.
Ah, yes, for
And,
the kites.
That's right.
Well, thank you very much
Okay,
indeed.
enjoyed it.
I'll come back in 20 years and see
Fair
you.
enough. We'll see you.
At the other end of the village from the castle is Eton Manor. The first Lord Joycey bought the manor and the estate in 1908. He was an amazing man. His grandfather had hewed coal as a pitman, yet he himself rose to become the greatest coal owner in the world. He also bought Fort Castle, just a couple of miles from Eton. The castle had belonged to Louisa, Marchioness of Waterford. She returned here from Ireland when she was widowed in 1869. A woman of outstanding beauty, she had been a bridesmaid to Queen Victoria. She restored both the castle and the church. She also demolished the top 2 stories of the Parsons Peel Tower to get a better view of the Cheviot Hills from her window. Lady Waterford rebuilt Ford Village, making it a model of its kind. Even the smithy has style and imagination. Lady Waterford was a gifted artist, and the school, now the village hall, became her gallery. Here, using the villagers as models, she painted her remarkable watercolour scenes from the Bible. She died in 1891 and is buried in Ford Churchyard, where her monument proclaims that she lived honoured and beloved by all. Past Ford, Heatherslow and Eton, the River Till continues its way northwards to join the Tweed, that famous river which marks for much of its length the border between England and Scotland. Berwick is the only English town lying north of the River Tweed. Its wealth, strength and strategic situation were such that it became a border shuttlecock between England and Scotland, changing hands 13 times before it finally became English in 1482. In the whole world, only the city of Jerusalem has suffered more sieges. The most majestic of Berwick's 3 bridges is Robert Stevenson's railway viaduct, the Royal Border Bridge, opened by Queen Victoria in 1850. The stone, used to face the 28 arches along its half-mile length, was taken from the ruins of the old castle, demolished to make way for Berwick's railway station. Not much remains of the walls King Edward II set round the town in the early 14th century, but the Elizabethan fortifications of ramparts and bastions built 250 years later are the best example of their kind in Europe. The wide stone-faced ramparts of earth would absorb or deflect cannon shot, whilst defending cannon, called flankers, cunningly sited within the arrow-shaped bastions, had a perfect line of fire along the walls at any attacking forces. Just within the ramparts is the Church of the Holy Trinity, dating from 1652. It is one of only 2 churches to be built in England during the years of Cromwell's rule. Cromwell was a regular visitor to Berwick, and it was at his request that this church has no tower. He hated the sound of church bells. For centuries, Berwickers were summoned to church instead by the bells ringing out from the tower of the town hall, set in the middle of the roadway of Marygate, Berwick's main street. Another of Berwick's fascinating features is the Ravensdown Barracks. Built in 1721, just after Derwentwater's rebellion, they were the very first purpose-built barracks in England. Until 1964, the barracks were the headquarters of the King's Own Scottish Borderers. Now they contain 2 museums and an art gallery, and are in the care of English Heritage. The barracks is just one of an abundance of fine old buildings in Berwick. Many of them are lovely, dignified houses. These were the homes of Berwick merchants more than 200 years ago. Their tall, handsome stone fronts tell of the prosperity of the town and the port, by then fully recovered from the savage centuries of border warfare. Such is Berwick, a border town without equal. But then there are so many villages in Northumberland, with histories almost as exciting and features just as fascinating. Warkworth is one of them. The old bridge, built in 1379, is the only fortified bridge in the north of England. Warkworth is a classic example of a planned medieval borough, hardly touched by the hand of time. The streets linking the bridge, the church and the castle are exactly as they were originally laid down, although their shops and pubs cater more for the visitor nowadays. Some of the houses may have changed in style and use, but the 77 burr gauges, or borough gauges, long narrow plots of land on which the houses stand, are just as they were first measured and allocated more than 800 years ago. The 12th century parish church of St. Lawrence is also special. It is the most complete Norman church in Northumberland. Only the steeple and the south aisle have been added since it was built. Lord Derwentwater's Jacobite rebel army held a service in this church on a Sunday morning in October 1715. Afterwards, they assembled in the marketplace to proclaim the old Pretender as King James III for the first time on English soil. But Warkworth's crowning glory is its castle. It still stands strongly astride the neck of the River Coquet's great looping meander around the village. This was at once both a stronghold and a palace, built to meet the needs of the proud Percys, then the most powerful family in England. Within these walls, Harry Hotspur, the most admired of all the great host of Northumbrian heroes, grew up. Hotspur was only 37 years old when he was killed at the Battle of Shrewsbury. Just north of Warkworth is Alnwick Castle, the other home of the Percys, now the Dukes of Northumberland. Built in Norman times, the castle occupies a commanding position at the strategic point where the Great North Road once crossed the River Allen. It saw much action during the Scottish Wars, but lost most of its military importance with the Union of the Crowns in 1603. The Barbican and Gatehouse, surmounted by their stone figures, are the best of their kind in Britain. In the stable block is the immaculate stagecoach, built in 1825 to carry the third Duke as the King of England's representative at the coronation in Paris of King Charles X of France. The castle also houses the excellent museum of the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers, the Fighting Fifth, one of the oldest and most famous regiments of the British Army. At the very heart of the castle is the keep. Here visitors pass through the palatial staterooms where so many of the priceless treasures of the Percy family can be seen. In the town, often referred to as the Windsor of the North, there is much to admire. The tree-lined streets with their sloping cobbled curbs, the old marketplace around which the town grew up, the town cross from which proclamations were read, and the arcaded Northumberland Hall with the town hall's clock tower rising behind it. In Narrowgate is the Old Cross pub with its window known as the Dirty Bottles, untouched for more than 150 years since the landlord was struck dead whilst arranging them. The inn sign refers to the coat of arms of the Veskies, who held Alnwick until the Percys took over in 1309. The lion coat of arms of the Percys can be seen everywhere in Alnwick. The most prominent example is the tenantry column erected in 1816. From Alnwick, the Aln coils its way to Alnmouth and the North Sea. The river looks gentle enough now as it winds among the moored yachts and pleasure boats. It must have been in much fiercer fettle on Christmas Day in 1806, when it burst its way through the sand dunes to carve a new coast to the north, cutting off the old Saxon church from the town. 6 miles north of Alnmouth is Howick Haven. The bay here is a lovely mixture of golden sand, limestone buckled into strange shapes, and weirdly weathered sandstone. Recently, footprints believed to be some 300 million years old were found here. These belong to an amphibious creature predating even the dinosaurs. These features attract geologists from all over Britain. Other visitors come here simply to enjoy the quiet peace of a summer day by the sea. Later, perhaps, they'll have a walk through the woodland to Howick Hall, the magnificent 18th century mansion of the Grey family, an offshoot of the Greys of Chillingham. The Greys also built Howick Village for their estate workers, and this bathing house, which they used as a seaside cottage when they came down to the beach for a swim. Just a mile above Howick, Cullenose Point, the first headland of the Great Wind Sill, juts defiantly out into the sea. Here, some of the milk-white kittiwakes gather sociably on the ledges, while hundreds of others wheel and soar along the cliff face. The tiny fishing village of Craster is named after the Craster family, who have lived here since the 12th century at least. Craster is, of course, world famous for its kippers, which can still be bought at the smokehouse in the village. A few kobolds still fish from Craster's harbour, and the village itself is a base from which you can begin the delightful stroll along a firm grassy path to Dunstanburgh. The site of this rugged old fortress covers more than 10 acres, the biggest in area of any Northumbrian castle. Its north-facing ramparts are the sheer 100-feet-high basalt cliffs of the Wind Sill. It once had a harbour which swept around to the west of the site. Built by Thomas, the scheming Earl of Lancaster, in 1313, it was extended and strengthened by John of Gaunt 50 years later. 100 years later still, and its useful life as a castle was over. It was never restored, and in the 500 years since, it has slowly slid into decay. Yet it remains one of the grandest, most romantic and stirring sights in Northumberland. Dunstanburgh is in the parish of Embleton. Here is a fine old church owned by Merton College, Oxford, since 1274. Right next to it, a perfect parson's peel tower. Not only the vicar, but most of his parishioners would seek refuge here during the regular Scots raids. A new vicarage was built in 1976, but over its 600 years, this old tower has been home to no less than 54 priests. Northwards from Embleton, long curving bays sweep along the coastline in two great golden arcs beyond Newton up to Beadnell. Beadnell has the only harbour on the northeast coast that faces west. The 200-year-old lime kilns right on the harbour wall now serve as storehouses for the fishermen. But they're also reminders that lime burning, together with smuggling, once supplemented the basic industry of fishing in so many of these little ports. But at sea houses, fishing was always a big occupation. In the days of the great herring catchers, this harbour would be filled from wall to wall with fishing boats. It's declined in recent years, but fish is still landed here and sold in John Swallow's Fisherman's Kitchen. Old tools used by the coopers to make barrels for the salted herring still hang from the ceiling. And sea houses' fish and chips are as good as you'll get anywhere. Today, though, Sea Houses is a bustling resort, adapted to meet the needs of its many holidaymakers and visitors. One of the highlights of a visit to this coast is a trip by boat from sea houses to the Farne Islands. The crossing takes about half an hour, and the number of islands visible cannot be guaranteed. At low tide, there are 28. At high tide, only 15. The Farnes are the last trailing glimpse of the great wind sail before it disappears into the North Sea. They provide a wonderful sanctuary for the thousands and thousands of seabirds that return here every April to breed. The Farnes are now one of the most important nature reserves in Europe. Grey seals are the rarest of their species in the world, yet there is a colony here of several thousand. Although they are Britain's biggest carnivores, they are playful, inquisitive creatures. Puffins too are colourful and amusing characters. 15,000 of them nest on the Farnes wherever they can find enough soil for their burrows. The locals call them Tommy Noddies. I think this is the puffin equivalent of a cuddle. The Longstone Lighthouse gives another splash of colour. It was from here in 1838 that Grace Darling and her father, the lighthouse keeper, set out in the teeth of a gale and mountainous seas to perform their heroic rescue of the 9 survivors of the SS Forfarshire. The best known of all the islands, though, is Inner Farne. It too has a lighthouse, and it is easily the most popular with both the birds and the visitors. This was St. Cuthbert's favourite retreat. He'd spent several years here as a hermit, and it was to Inner Farne that he returned for the last few months of his life before he died in March 687. Waves roll in endlessly across the 2 miles of sea which separate the Farnes and Bamborough. Bamborough, the finest jewel in the whole length of this glorious heritage coastline. The castle draws the eye from every direction. From among the sand dunes, poppies, the flowers of peace, soften the image of the old stronghold. But from the village, the castle outline is massively majestic. Here Edwin, the first of the great Saxon kings of Northumbria, had his capital. Aidan, who was the first of a long line of Saxon saints of Northumbria, died at Bamborough on the exact spot where the church named after him now stands. Just 4 miles to the north is Lindisfarne, Holy Island. It becomes an island twice a day as the tide rises. After the tide retreats, it can be reached by driving over the 3-mile-long causeway. It was to Lindisfarne that Aidan came in 635 to found the first Northumbrian monastery. The 150 years which followed this small beginning have become known as Northumbria's Golden Age, and this little island became famous throughout the whole of Christendom. The castle on Holy Island looks just like a stout stone battleship sitting firmly on yet another outcrop of the Great Windsail. It was transformed in 1902 by Sir Edwin Lutyens into a delightful and compact country house. It had originally been built in 1550 by King Henry VIII to protect the excellent harbour lying behind it. Every summer, thousands of visitors come to Holy Island to enjoy its exceptional attractions. In the high hills of North Northumberland, every winter brings its own mini ice age. But with each spring, returning warmth unlocks the icy grip. The snowdrops give the first signal for spring's awakening flowers. Buds and blossoms bring new life to the trees. Ploughing, sowing and lambing mark the start of the age-old cycle of the farming year and all the seasons that follow. This lovely area is at last settled to peace. But for centuries, it suffered the ceaseless ebb and flow of border warfare. North Northumberland was the battleground on which the longest war in our history was fought. It was also a bulwark behind which the rest of England sheltered and prospered. The great lords of Northumberland needed their castles, the knights and priests their peel towers, and the farmers their basil houses, long after the rest of the country had forgotten about the need for defence. Like the great glaciers of the last ice age, these troubled times have all melted away, and North Northumberland is now a land to be enjoyed. There's so much that's special and precious in North Northumberland, so much to be discovered, so much to be proud of and treasured. Now that you've seen some of it, why not come here and enjoy it in the warmth that returns every year after the ice?